Hello and welcome back to another episode of Audio Drama Reviews. This time it's some women's rights audio drama fiction. This time we have the podcasts Bloom, Grace Under Pressure, and Supreme, The Battle for Roe. Bloom Podcast, investigating fictional Swiss art. A somewhat complicated behind-the-scenes history with translations from Spanish is made harder by its first couple of episodes. Bloom is a blend of Untold Virginia's podcast within a podcast format and Six Cold Feet or Searching for Salah's person of interest plots. Bloom, fast-paced exposition in a podcast format. It hits the ground running a bit too hard and fast when you aren't giving it 100% of your attention. Most audio dramas I've listened to have a 90 to 95% of a brain needed to understand the plot. That 5 to 10% difference I used for exercising or household chores. Because of this, I had to go back and re-listen to the first couple episodes before moving forward. The odd-numbered episodes introduce followable story beats. The connective tissue between episodes are logical and follow a certain narrative pattern. That being, discover a new fact and find someone who's an expert in said fact. The one exception is the midpoint, research and world building. Between episodes 5 and 6, some psychological manipulation and subliminal messaging may be a factor. While it makes sense that Emma would talk to a neurologist, it feels like a weird tangent to take in the moment. By the end of episode 6 and the beginning of 7, we're back to focusing on Clara Torres and Ursula Bloom. It feels a bit too much like obvious foreshadowing for the end. Like one of these things is not like the other. The investigative journalism aspect isn't that well suited for a podcast about a fictional artist, even if it is accurate to how journalists might portray a person or subject, even if it is accurate to how journalists might research a person or subject. One of the creators, Carmen Pacheco, said that we, Pacheco and Manuel Bartual, made sure most of the facts and historical figures mentioned are real. Bartual and Pacheco were writing partners for the original Bloom podcast in Spanish. Bloom, a podcast tour of Switzerland's art scene. As stated before, this podcast shares a lot in common with similar stories like Searching for Salah, where Bloom uses history as a way to lend credence to a fictional Swiss artist. Salah uses biography to tell a story about a real person from history, with plenty of interest and intrigue to keep the audience listening. Comparisons between the two don't end there. Just as Salah was a marketing campaign for a product or service, so too was the Bloom podcast. While it wasn't clear what Salah was trying to market, Bloom is clear with its call to action, that being to get eyes on Switzerland's art scene. While Bloom may have a clearer goal for why the creators made it, the story ultimately goes nowhere and ends on an unsatisfying note. It felt as if the two final scenes of the last episode were tacked on because the main mystery of what happened to Clara and Ursula wasn't resolved. How the creators solve the mystery introduces new problems more so than answers old ones. There's also too much emotional distance between Ursula and Emma, mostly due to Clara being an unnecessary complication that probably could have been cut to allow a more direct connection between the artist and the podcaster. 7 out of 10 stars. Grace Under Pressure. Aside from a Queen pun, I could have opened this review with this 8-episode audio drama from Pastiche NYC tackles the 90s in a way that isn't driven by nostalgia from non-marginalized groups. Like any historical period, women, people of color, and the LGBTQ community didn't have as many freedoms as their straight white male counterparts. Truth be told, it's still an ongoing battle. What? Second-wave feminism is evolving? Contrary to some right-wing constituents, feminism isn't the total obliteration of men and their successes, nor is it an indoctrination of kids by transgender people. We're about to get political here for a second. Conservative lawmakers have, in the summer months of 2023, tried to push bills that could legally target non-cisgender people. The problem is the law would only apply to them. Thankfully, a lot of these bills have been struck down in the courts since this review went live on the website. However, that doesn't mean they aren't done trying. What does this have to do with feminism? Well, feminism in the literary sense of the world has more to do with gender than biological sex. at least in the most modern incarnation. The idea that feminists are, quote, feminazis overlooks this fact, battling themes of feminism with a believable plot. The main character of Grace, played by Alice King, finds herself in jobs that get progressively worse until she's a laundromat attendant. The job before was a sweatshop. If the sweatshop came before the final episode, cries of Deus Ex Machina might have been warranted. Unfortunately, as it stands, I think they made the right choice in the order of final episodes. They sacrificed the thematic pattern of Grace's jobs for a plot with a happier ending, joke names, and repetitive singing. While classified as a comedy, the humor comes from names of the male characters. In episode 2, Grace's boss is named Mr. McWeenie. Mr. McWeenie is a creep in his treatment of women, especially with the noises he makes with his mouth. The man's audible tics are reminiscent of Beavis from Beavis and Butthead, that is, assuming the tall, blonde-haired alter ego of Cornholio was competent enough to run a business. The inclusion of a, quote, Greek chorus at the beginning of each episode brings down the total enjoyment of the series. The chorus, really an opening song, made little sense in the grand scheme of things. The song itself lasts a bit too long, and after the fourth or fifth time, it becomes repetitive. It feels like copying and pasting the music without a compelling reason. Because of these things, the production drops 1 to 1.5 stars from an internally consistent rating to 7.5 out of 10 minus stars. Supreme, The Battle for Roe. For this review, I combined 2 posts on the website, one about the whole announcement of the audio drama, and one for the review. If you think you missed something, it's probably because I put it in another post. This will be a sort of condensed review of them both. With that out of the way, let's get started. And links to the articles will be in the show notes, so there you go. While listening to Supreme, The Battle for Roe, I was worried that there would be 2 outcomes that I was worried about. Those are the straight white male saves the day for women, or an unseen happy ending from out of nowhere. The first of these should be self-explanatory. Throughout the first 6 episodes, the worry that Harry Blackman would act as a white savior and downplay Sarah Weddington, voiced by Ethan Hawke's daughter Maya Hawke, role in the story. When the episodes dealing primarily with Blackman, played by William H. Macy, began a few episodes before the final one, that worry became more troubling from a narrative perspective. Historically, it makes sense to go that route they did. There's not a lot of room for deviation in a story everyone knows the ending to already. Most Americans know the ruling that legalized abortion, if only for the recent overturn in 2022 by Dobbs and Jackson's Women's Health. What seemed an impossibility became a horrifying reality for women across the country. Rewind the clocks back to 1971, and the same thing applied then, just reversed. 2 years passed since Weddington first argued, and the opinion of the court decided the almost 50 years of the constitutional right to have an abortion. In the audio drama, the arguments for and against Roe take less time than the decision itself. Afterward, the story becomes Blackman's for the remainder, save for a couple brief appearances by Hawke to see what she's been doing since her argument. Audio drama and investment. Roe money, less problems. As hinted at above, the legal courtroom side of the battle goes by too quickly and comes in moments when things can't get any worse for Weddington. Every time before getting good news about the case, Weddington is an anxious mess, thinking the worst possible thing has happened or will happen. Those moments of good catastrophe, while perhaps done too many times, work to uplift an already dour story of the things women went through regarding abortions. Nowhere is this more apparent than in episode 5, where we are the side of the person most impacted by whether abortion is constitutionally protected or not. It's scary that for many people in states that outlaw abortion, the same problems are popping up again, they're just in a different context. In terms of focus, the final 3 episodes are all over the place, even when the story shifts to Blackman's point of view. This makes the finale lose some of the impact that the decision must have had for women around the country. It feels almost tagged on because if it wasn't, the story would be incomplete. The anticlimactic moment could be a case of expectations being greater than reality, but with the dramatization of a landmark case like this, that seems kind of ironic. Ad breaks and lost tension. The ad placements come at moments of closure. A scene ends and then 2 to 3 ads play before a new scene begins. Reading it that way, it doesn't seem so bad. Listening, however, is like watching a movie free with ads on Amazon or YouTube. All the tension is lost as soon as the ad hits. If the scenes before the ad break were cliffhangers, that would be different. As it stands, the placement of ads is the worst of both worlds. This audio drama dramatization of the Roe v. Wade case perhaps bites off more than it can chew. The story is there, but the construction and structure makes the overall drama forgettable in some ways. Even binging the series on your podcast platform of choice wouldn't help with this issue of the dreaded ad break. It's not lost tension, it's lost interest by the time you get back. Despite the less than ideal attributes hindering it, I still would put this up with shows like 1865 and Harlem Queen. All 3 podcasts take a period of history often overlooked or skipped over in history classrooms. People know John Wilkes Booth shot Lincoln in 1865, but what happened after is also important. K-12 social studies classes tend to skip right to Andrew Johnson and his impeachment. Harlem Queen does the same thing with 1920s jazz age by putting the spotlight on a lesser-known figure in that period of United States history. Supreme, The Battle for Roe tackles the personable qualities of Harlem Queen and the historical event of 1865 and combines the two for a story of grand scope, but lackluster in some regards, tragic and heartbreaking in others. Most of my complaints have to do more with the balance of legal drama versus period drama about real people. Still a definite listen for those wanting to know more. 8 out of 10 stars.